Welcome to Concept to Creation, a podcast featuring entrepreneurs who share their business journey. We'll hear what motivated them to turn their dreams into a business. They'll share stories from the trenches of business, from raising capital, creating products or services, navigating regulations, hiring employees, and managing competition and growth. We'll discover their successes and failures, and they'll provide advice for budding entrepreneurs. Now, here's your host and fellow entrepreneur, Mike Conrad.
Welcome back to the Concept to Creation podcast. My guest today is Bob Black. I first met Bob back in the late 1980s when he was selling German-built drag soldering machines made by Ziva. While Bob has been involved in several businesses, he is perhaps best known for his work with Juki, importing and selling component placement equipment. Bob has imported and sold equipment from Germany, Switzerland, Japan, and Italy. Bob shares his journey of entrepreneurship through several companies. Bob shares what he's learned working with international companies and even what he's taught them. And just in case anyone thinks owning your own business allows one to leisurely lounge around, he talks about all the years he spent 27 days a month traveling for his business. Here's my conversation with industry icon, Bob Black. Bob Black, welcome to Concept to Creation. Thank you for being my guest today. I've been looking forward to this conversation.
Well, thanks, Mike. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's been a long time since we've seen each other face to face. We've done many trade show dinners together, and I think, for a long time we shared the same PR company. So Megan would put together a dinner, and we'd all be, commiserating, either telling each other how great the show was, or saying we'll never do another show again, or whatever the case may be. But it's been a long time, and you have been in this industry a very long time. But before we get into that, tell me about your background. Did you become an adult and step right into this industry? Did you do other things first, or what led you here? What did you do before you became an icon in the electronic assembly equipment space?
Well, I started out planning to be a doctor. My parents always had programmed that I was to be a doctor. I took German in high school because that's the language of medicine. Went to the University of California, Davis. After 2 years, I was so tired of chemistry and biochemistry and physiology and the rest of it that I changed my major to history and economics. And of course, my parents weren't pleased, but I graduated with a bachelor's degree in history with a concentration in economics. And after that, I went home, looked for a job, decided I wanted to go back and get a master's degree so I could teach at a junior college. And so I had to earn money to do that because my parents helped me in college. I worked summers to earn the money, and then they filled in the rest. But so I went to work at a fast food restaurant, which doesn't exist anymore, called Red Barn. And I managed that for a year and saved $6,000 and was going to go back to Davis to get a master's degree in education. And my father gave me the one probably good piece of advice that I ever listened to him on. He said, "Are you sure you'll be able to get a job once you graduate with this master's degree? Have you checked out the availability of positions? You say you want to teach at a junior college. Have you checked how easy it is to get one of those positions?" And I thought about it, and I said, "Yeah, that's probably a pretty good idea." So I looked around, and it was very difficult to get a teaching position at a junior college. There were waiting lists of people that wanted them. And a lot of them were substitute teaching in high schools and grade schools just to make ends meet because they couldn't get a position in a junior college. So that kind of changed my mind. And right then, kind of fate took a turn. And my friend Bob Bugarin, who I'd worked in the Exxon station in Los Gatos with all during high school and summers during college, called me and said, "I'm starting a company to sell tools and supplies to Silicon Valley, and I need somebody to help me. Will you come talk to me about it?" And so I went down and talked to him, and he was going to do all the outside sales work, and he wanted somebody to run the office and do the inside sales. And I said, well, I've never done any of that. And he said, well, it's not so difficult. I'll help you out to learn. So I started working with him, and we built that business over 9 years to almost 100 people, offices in 3 states, Oregon, Washington, and of course, Northern California. We were a distributor of about 60 or 70 different lines of tools and supplies, including solder and fluxes and everything. And then we got into capital equipment. And one of those companies that we represented in capital equipment was a German company called Ziva, and they made drag soldering machines.
I remember I used to sell drag soldering machines way back in the day.
Way back in the day. And of course, in those days, soldering machines were either from Hollis or Electrovert, and they were all wave solder machines. And then fate took a turn again, and the multi-layer board came on the scene. And the early wave solder machines didn't have much of a preheat zone. They had a little coil that would dry the flux and then go into the wave and turn into a pretzel. The warpage was tremendous. Well, as you know, the drag soldering machine, the board went into the solder all at one time. And you could vary the dwell time that it sat in the solder before it came out. And it kept multi-layer boards flat. And we could not keep machines in stock. We sold 180 machines in a year and a half. All right. And at a very good, I mean, not a distributor's commission. We had a profit margin of 60% on these machines. We were importing them ourselves from Germany. And then I was doing the demos and so forth. And then we hired more people to do installation and training. And so we became, that really financed the growth of our company. We became a very successful company. At that time, we were about the same size as Comkyle, who was our main competitor. And that's how I got into the capital equipment business. Because when we had a chance to sell Ziva, Bobby Guerin came in my office with a bunch of literature and manuals and put it on my desk and said, "You read German, don't you?" And I said, "Well, yeah." And he said, "Well, if this is all in German, you're responsible for this." So that's how I got really into the capital equipment side of things, was the fact that I spoke German. So after some years in that business, we'd grown a lot. We had a lot of employees. I got really tired of the business, and Bob and I were, well, I wouldn't say we weren't fighting, but there was friction. And so being the junior partner, I had 30% of the company. He had 70%. I wrote a plan to run the company without me, and went into his office and said, "I've got a plan here to reorganize the company." He says, "Why would I want to reorganize my company?" I said, "Because the last page is my resignation." And I said, "Read it, and then I'll be in my office." So, at that point, I called up Rudy Warner, who was the president of Ziva in Germany, and I said, "I'm leaving RGB." And he goes, "Where are you going?" And I said, "Well, it depends on you. You can't keep flying people over here and working on things. You need to have a company here, and I'm willing to help you start that company. But if you're not interested, just tell me, and I'll find something else."
Now, before we go there, this is getting very interesting. I just want to go back a little bit. When the thing about being a distributor, in a classic sense, and there are exceptions to this, is someone else builds it, you buy it, and you sell it, right? You own that inventory. Traditionally, you own that inventory.
You do.
Call it a flooring cost or whatever, but you own that. Those machines, probably by today's standards, would seem pretty inexpensive, but back then, those machines weren't cheap. Your markup was 60%. So how did you finance, starting a business from scratch, going from gas stations and restaurants to, legitimate, well, not that those aren't legitimate, but legitimately your own business? How did you come up with the funding to buy one machine, 10 machines, pay the freight, all that?
That's where the economics came in. You always eventually can use your education. And we made enough profit on the volume of soldering machines to pay for the inventory growth in the distributor commodity products. And plus, I got extended terms by, we were selling so much that the Germans gave us, 90 or 120 days to pay rather than just 30. So that we had a chance to get the machines over. It took about 30 days on the water, get them into stock and ship them out. And of course, we were giving the customer 30-day terms. So we could manage the cash flow that way. And we grew so fast that we basically bootstrapped the whole thing. And by the time we had gotten that large, then we could get a line of credit with the bank because, when you're small, the bank doesn't want to know you.
Right. Once you can prove you don't. Once you can prove you don't need the money, they're handing it out, right?
Exactly. So that's actually, I wouldn't recommend that as a model to build a company, but we had an extraordinary set of circumstances. We had the only soldering machine that would keep boards flat because it took Hollis and Electivert about 2 years to figure out how to run multi-layer boards successfully on wave solder machines. And in that time, we sold, to a tremendous volume of machines at an average price of probably 70, 80,000 each. And the profit on those were about 35,000 each, or 40. And that gave us more than enough money to run the company and to pay for the growth.
Yeah, I think your effort in bringing in the Ziva drag solder machines and kind of bringing drag solder machines into the common vernacular, because they were always a very fringy machine, a fringy technology. And then, as you said, multi-level boards and lead tinning all made drag soldering machines a little bit more attractive for logistical, geography kind of reasons. I think your effort and your success in that industry is what caused my former employer to get into business. I used to work for a company called Unit Design, and they built their own drag soldering machine and got some patents and things like that. But I think they were chasing your model, only they got in a little too late, and they got in as surface mount was making its way onto the scene. And
we had a very successful run for about 10 years, 9.5 to be precise. And then surface mount came. And of course you need a vibratory wave or a rough wave followed by a smooth wave to solder bottom glued surface mount parts. And the drag solder machine couldn't do that. The shadowing as you went through the solder and pulled it out meant that the back half of the components weren't soldered. So that was kind of the end of drag soldering as technology moved along.
But before the end came, which ultimately pretty much every equipment type in our industry will see an end at some point as one thing ends and something else comes in to take its place. There are still some disruptive forces left in our industry, and surface mount was certainly a disruptive force for through-hole. But before that, when there was still life left in through-hole, you exited the relationship with your now former business partner and went to the Germans and made a pitch to acquire that line. Is that correct?
Yeah, and the reason I did that is that Ziva, of course, had grown to be a very successful company in Germany with the manufacture of the drag soldering machines. But Rudy Warner, who was president of Ziva, was also a very forward-thinking man. And he would go every year to the head guys at Bosch, to the head guys at Mercedes, to the head guys at BMW, and say, what's coming next? What do you need? What can we do for you? And he would invest a lot of time into doing that. So, 2 years before I left RGB, he had formed a new company called Zivatech by merging with a company called Montech in Switzerland. And Montech's business was they made robotic assembly machines to assemble Swiss watches. And so they were very used to picking up small parts and orienting them accurately and putting them in an assembly. And Rudy saw that, and he'd heard from Bosch that everything was going to go surface mount within 5 years. And so he made a joint venture with that company, took the Ziva from Ziva and the tech from Montech, and that's where Zivatech started in Switzerland, and started to build one of the first Western-built placement machines. And so that was one of the influences why I called him and said, we need to start a company here, because by that time I'd sold the first two surface mount machines in California uh, through RGB as the distributor. And I knew that was a coming technology. So that was one of the things that motivated me to call him. And of course, with a surface mount machine, you need a lot more technical support than you do in a drag solder machine. Surface mount machine, you need to have on-site techs that can respond instantly if there's a problem. Solder machine, things are pretty easy to fix.
Yeah, you can certainly see the parts versus some of the new machines where like pick and place machines, for example, I have no idea how they can pick up a part that one cannot even see. If you drop a component, it ends up in the soles of your shoe. You'll never find it.
Yeah.
How did you go about convincing, what argument did you make to your business contacts in Germany at Ziva to go with you?
Warner knew. I told you that I called him and said I'm leaving RGB, and he got very excited. And he said, "Where are you going?" I said, "It depends on you. I've got a list. You're the first on the list. If you're interested in starting a company over here and growing it, then I'm willing to do that with you."
So did you have to convince them? Did you have to convince them that the success that they had under the former company with you and your business partner? People don't like to knock success. If things are going well, if it ain't broke, fix it.
We weren't going to get rid of RGB. They were still going to be the rep in California, the distributor in California. We were just going to start a company to stock parts, have service technicians, and be able to service the customers in the United States to the level that they expected. We were at that time, if something broke on a placement machine, we put a guy on a plane in Zurich and he flew to San Francisco. And that's not really the way to have fast response.
Right.
So, I told Rudy, I've got a list and you're the first guy on it. And he goes, tear up your list. I'll be back to you within 2 weeks. And he called me back in 2 weeks and he gave me a choice. He said, look, we'll start the company. He said, we can put up 100% of the money and you can be the vice president, or you can put up 30% of the money and you can be the president, your choice. And I said, well, I'm getting paid out over the next year and a half from RGB for my stock. If you'll let me pay in over a year and a half, I'll be president and do the investment. And so that's how Zivatech Inc. started.
So you've got this track record now of being very savvy with your money, rather than putting 100% of the cost of running a business out of your pocket by draining your bank account or charging up your credit cards or getting investors or getting loans, which is impossible to do when you're a young company. You were pretty savvy at being able to leverage other people's, and I don't say this in a negative way at all, it's a positive way. You were very savvy in being able to leverage other people's money, other people's terms, because ultimately it helped them because they wanted to work with you. They needed you to be successful, and you needed them to start the company to fund it. So that was a really good partnership between the people that have the money, but not the ability to sell their product, and the person who has the ability to sell the product that doesn't have all the money required to do so. So it was a really good merger.
Well, it worked out ultimately because Mr. Warner, who's still alive now, he's in his 90s and lives in a very elegant what's called an Eldersheim in German, an elder's home, with his wife overlooking the lake of Zurich. We ended up selling Zivatech for about $200 million a few years later. So he certainly did. He did all right by his investment, that's for sure.
And obviously, I'm assuming he was able to sell it. You guys were able to sell it for $200 million before Through-Hole became, written in the annals of history, and Surface Mount made those types of products obsolete? Or did Zivatech evolve and come up with more relevant products?
Zivatech was the Surface Mount company. Remember, it was the merger.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
Rudy actually did a very shrewd thing. Ziva in Germany owned half of Zivatech in Switzerland, and Rudy owned about a third of Ziva in Germany. Right. So he traded all his shares in Ziva for all their shares in Zivatech, and he ended up owning half of the Swiss company that manufactured the machines. So he did very well for himself. So Zivatech at that time had no more soldering. It was all surface mount equipment.
Interesting. and just as well. Are they still around today? Are they still relevant today?
They were bought by ESIC,
Okay.
the European Semiconductor Equipment Corporation, back in '84, or was it '94? That was '84, and no, it was '94, and they got bought by Bessie. You know, Bessie, the Dutch conglomerate. Bessie bought up a lot of surface mount and related semiconductor equipment companies. And so they bought Datacon, they bought ESIC, they bought Laurier. So that's now a homogenous group. So the products still exist and the company still exists, but it's part of a big conglomeration now.
So you sell Ziva, and what was next? I know you worked with Juki. Was that the next step, or was there something in between?
Well, I ran the U.S. operation for ESIC for a couple of years. Warner retired right after the ESIC buyout, and I had signed a contract to work for 2 years minimum for ESIC, and I left on the last day of the second year. Yeah. I won't go into a lot of details, but the ethics involved in the top management in ESIC was not my style. Right. And in fact, I refused several times to do things that they ordered me to do with regards to bank documentation and so forth, which I wouldn't do. And they actually fired my CFO because he refused also to do it. But he went on and became very successful, starting another company. So it turned out good for him. It was a blessing. Too.
Yeah, well, whenever we sell our companies, that's usually the price we have to pay, is we have to stick around for a couple of years. One, so they can do the brain drain, and two, they can keep an eye on you to make sure you're not competing, I suppose.
Yeah, and the reason ESIC had bought Zivatech at the time was we had invented a machine called the Micron 2. And I don't know if you remember at the time in semiconductor, Intel had made the Pentium processor, and it was the most popular thing, in the world for PCs. Yeah, and PCs were just starting to get huge growth. And the first Pentium was wire bond inside. It was chip and wire, same as all their packages had been. The second version was a chip and wire. In the third version, the frequency was getting so high that the little wire bonds would broadcast signal, and they would lose signal integrity between the chip and the board because of the package. So that's when they changed the inside of the Pentium to flip chip. And they needed a machine to place a flip chip about 3/4 of an inch square with 3,500 bumps on the bottom, 3 mil pitch, 3 mil bump, 3 mil center, rows and columns of 3,800 and something, I think it was, bumps. And of those bumps, 500 were signal carrying, and the others they all used as a heat sink to suck the heat out of the chip and into the package, so it would dissipate the heat. Well, there was no machine in the world that could place this flip chip accurately enough for what they wanted to do, and we made that machine at Zivatech. And the funny story was Intel did not want to buy our machine because we were too small a company. We were only $180 million revenue. And that, to them, was a big risk. They wanted K&S to build it, where they bought most of their wire bonders and die bonders. And K&S had no clue how to make a high-accuracy placement machine. They failed in 2 or 3 attempts. And we actually got the contract and ended up selling about 200 Micron 2s over the next couple of years to Intel at $500,000 each. And then, of course, when Intel buys you, every semiconductor in the world wants to buy.
Right, stand in line. Yeah, sure.
So this is why ESIC bought us, is because ESIC was the biggest competitor to K&S for die bonders and wire bonders, but they had never gotten any Intel business. They had lost always to Intel, and we were in Intel. So they bought our company for, as I said, for about $200 million just to get into Intel. Well, with my troubles in leaving the company, shortly after I left the company, I got a call from a friend of mine in Japan at Juki. And of course, Zivatech had made an agreement with Juki years before. A lot of the machines that Zivatech sold were manufactured by Juki in Japan and sold under the Zivatech name. And we built some high-end machines like this Micron 2 I was describing to you. We built that in Switzerland because we could afford to. But the regular day-to-day workhorse placement machines were coming from Juki. So I got a call saying, would you visit us? So I flew to Japan, met with the president of Juki and a couple of people, and they said, look, the business since you left is going down, down, down. We are not going to renew our contract with ESIC. It expires next February. And this was in the fall sometime. And we would like you to start a new company, and we would like you to sell the products under the Juki name worldwide. And I said, and they said, we think it'll take about 15 million in startup money. We'd like to put up half of it and have you raise the other half. So basically, I went back to all the guys that had invested in Zivatech and said, I need a little of it back. And that's when we started Juki Automation Systems, Inc. In the U.S. and Juki Automation Systems, GmbH in Germany. And went to ESIC. Of course, ESIC was very displeased with when Juki said not.
They didn't share your enthusiasm, right?
They didn't care about placement machines at all. They liked the profit from them. But their business was semiconductor business. They had bought the business for the Micron 2, and the business with the placement machines was a pleasant surprise.
Did you create Juki GmbH just to have a European footprint? Was that the only reason? You weren't manufacturing anything in Germany, right? Under Juki.
Well, no, we weren't, but we saw the EU coming. Okay. We still had a Swiss presence because we had some employees, but we started also a German company because you need to have a company in the EU, and Switzerland has treaties, but they're not fully in the EU.
Right.
So it was mostly a tax reason.
Notoriously neutral, Switzerland.
So we negotiated with ESIC, and we actually bought out we bought the business back from them rather than we could have just started again from scratch. But we took all the employees off their hands. We took the facilities and the leases off their hands. We bought the inventory back, and we paid them a little bit of a bonus for being cooperative and doing it nicely. Sure. So that's how Juki. I got back into the placement business after the ESIC experience.
What I find very interesting is that there's a strong takeaway, which I'm sure the fact has not been lost on you. You are the common thread between all these companies. All these companies touched each other in one way or another through partnerships or private label arrangements. You were one of the players, and RGB with your partner. And when you left that, your principal said, "No, we want to continue working with Bob." So you set up another company, and then when that got sold off, another company that you had done work for indirectly from Zivatech, which is Juki's private label deal, they tapped you. So there's a common denominator where you're in each of these three companies, and
well, a little bit. But look, if ESIC had done, if they put the effort and they put the resources into continuing to promote the placement business and grow the business, because certainly the market was still growing, then it would never have happened. There would have been no reason to do it. They called on me, but the reason they called on me was that the business was going in reverse. It was starting to recede and to fail. And they wanted to get it back to where it had been before and beyond. And so that's why they called on me. And the ESIC guys, I mean, the management of the company was in a mess. I was in what was called a management council for 2 years, which was supposedly the top 5 guys under the CEO and the CFO. and we were supposed to run the day-to-day business, and I had to fly to Switzerland every month for 2 days of meetings, right? And I can tell you, this group of 5 people, which were bright people, we had the power of nothing. I mean, we were just a rubber stamp. The whole management of the place was so disjointed that I could see that they would end up selling out to somebody, and they ended up selling out to Bessie a couple of years after I left.
Yeah, you saw that. You saw the writing on the wall.
Yeah.
So you managed, I suppose, to raise the $7 million that Juki, wanted to split with you, right? So
yes.
You raised your 7. They came up with their half, or slightly more than half, and you raised that through asking people to kind of claw back, their
just
their
friends
profits.
that had made money out of the original Zivatech sale to Essig.
Right.
Rudy Warner being one, of course. He was retired, but he still had plenty of money. And then after 3 years of working together with the shareholders and Juki, Juki made us an offer to buy us all out, of course, at a decent, fair profit. And so all those people got their money back again with a nice increase the second time. So, and then Juki, as it does today, owns 100%.
And all the years you were associated with Juki, was only a short time of that where you and the other shareholders owned it? And did Juki very quickly
3 years,
buy it back?
3 years.
3 years.
3 years.
You had equity
Yeah.
for 3 years. And
then they asked to buy it back, and I was the negotiator for the independent shareholders. And Rick Nagashima, who was my boss in Japan, who was the president of the Surfside division, was the negotiator on behalf of the Juki management, and we came very quickly to a very fair arrangement.
But you stayed with Juki. You were pretty much Juki. You were Juki for all intents and purposes
in the United States. And I retired from Juki two and a half years ago.
Right.
Turned over my CEO's position to Bill Astle, who's doing a great job running Juki Automation Systems now. But I also resigned my position in Japan because after the starting the new Juki Automation Systems in the U.S., they asked me to be a corporate officer of the Juki Corporation in Japan, and to be on their corporate management team. And so I had 2 jobs. I had a job in Tokyo and a job in the U.S. And that went for about 7 years, 8 years. And I resigned that the same time I retired from Juki here.
How common is it for a traditional Japanese company to have senior level management not Japanese? I know Nissan tried that, and that didn't go too well when the head of Nissan got arrested for whatever happened. But I view, maybe this is just a stereotype. Maybe it used to be accurate and it's not now. But my view of Japan is that it's very nationalistic, and I don't mean that in a negative way. That Japan is a very inward country, right? And once you're out of Tokyo, very little English is spoken.
To answer your question, so far in Juki's history, I'm the only one. I'm the only non-Japanese that has been a corporate officer. But I think there will be another one. It may come from the sewing machine division. But you have to realize Juki Corporation has about 7,000 employees worldwide. More than half of them are not Japanese.
Right. But in senior management, though, that's an honored position.
Subsidiary companies. So they need to, and I came up when I was there, I spent about $300 or at that time of my own money. And I bought a series of little white buttons with the Juki logo saying "One Juki." Because we had a lot of companies and subsidiaries around the world, and we had a lot of employees. We had South American employees, North American employees, European employees, African employees, many other countries in Asia. But we were all part of one company. And I wanted to get the point across to some of these people that were a little bit not just nationalistic, but also a little bit sons of the sun, a little World War II type remembrance right. That, hey, we're not Japanese. We're an international company and we're a team. And the president, unfortunately, liked my buttons and ordered everybody in the company to wear one. So I distributed about 7,000 of those buttons to all the guys worldwide. And, what I tried to do when I was in the Japanese management is if you design a machine just for Japan, for the Japanese market, you will not be successful to sell it in the United States. You will not be successful to sell it in Europe. You will not be successful to sell it to half the places in China. Why? Board size. Japanese board size is 250 by 330 millimeters. That's the standard size. It takes an act of God to make something bigger than that. If you need more space, you just have 2 boards, right? In America, we've got boards that are 24 by 30. I mean, these monstrosities. So if you made machines just for the Japanese board size, good luck. You can sell them to Japanese companies all day long, but you can't sell them in America.
That reminds me of the U.S. auto industry in the early days of them trying to sell to Japan. They weren't committed fully to sell to Japan, so they were not building right-hand drive cars as Japan uses. They were saying, well, if you want to buy our cars, you buy an American-style car, left-hand drive, which doesn't do well when in their environment, and that's an example of not, of being homegrown centric and not adapting to the market. How much did they learn from you? How much did Juki, a Japanese company, multinational, obviously,
hopefully quite a bit. I viewed my job as to bring the demands of my market and also the European market, because in the latter part of my career, I managed the European operation as well as the American operation. It was my job to bring the demands of that market to Japan and make sure that when we design new products, that market's demands were included. And I took that very seriously, because if I didn't, we'd have a lot of trouble selling a lot of whatever was made. So it was absolutely essential that be done.
Now, obviously, they knew you, or at least when Juki tapped you on the shoulder and said, we want you to come work with us, they knew who you were. Probably they knew certainly what you're capable of doing for products. How much of Bob Black did they have to get used to from a personality standpoint? You are a unique person. We all have our unique personalities. And I mean that as a compliment. I mean, when you are sitting at a table of 10 or 20 people, where the conversation is going to start. Who's going to dominate the conversation. Who everyone's going to be glued to. It's Bob Black, right? It's always been that way.
Not in Japan. And this was maybe the most difficult thing I had to learn in my career. In Japan, raising your voice is a sign of weakness. Getting excited is a sign of weakness. You can't control yourself. You don't have the discipline to control yourself. So when I first went over there, I was very ineffective because I made a lot of noise, but nobody listened to a thing I said. And I had to really teach myself to be stone-faced and to sit there and not react, right? And to make my points logically and in consecutive order. And I got really good at it. I could out-Japanese some of the Japanese occasionally. But that's absolutely necessary, because in Japanese culture, especially in business culture, emotion or anger is a sign of weakness and a sign of incapability to do a serious job. And so, I had to really change a lot the more I got involved in the Japanese business. And it was good for me, because we get too excited in America about a lot of things anyway.
Yes. We don't even need to go down that road, but we could have a whole conversation about that. I totally agree. How much do you think you had an effect on changing them, the Japanese management structure? you changed. You understood what was respected, what was not respected. You understood how they interpret your actions. How did you have an effect on them equal to that, where they better understood the American market?
I hope I think so. I mean, even though I'm retired, I still am occasionally asked for my opinion on things and so forth. And I try to visit there once a year. I've missed the last year, of course, because of COVID, and they're still having their COVID difficulties. But I hope to go again next year, God willing. And I always have a meeting with the president and the top 2 or 3 guys. And the last time I was there, they asked me a lot about my new project, with Aseji. And 4 weeks later, they ended up announcing they were buying 49% of Aseji in Italy. So I figured why they gave me such a nice lunch. They were picking my brain as to what to do. So in that respect, since I'm, my part-time job now is the North American sales manager for Aseji Automation SRL, which is a company located just outside Venice in Italy. And it's the largest manufacturer of component storage systems for the surface mount market worldwide.
We're talking about these towers, these giant towers that we see. Yeah, the walls.
Exactly. And, I found that business while I was still president at Juki Automation Systems before my retirement. It was about 7 years ago. And it's a funny story. It shows how Providence sometimes happens, because I had a customer in Connecticut that had a lot of MyData towers. And MyData was the first company to introduce storage, component storage towers in the market, to their credit. But those towers weren't made by MyData at that time. They were made by a company in Munich called Raytel. And Raytel was a branch off. Remember Rayonic, the old
sure.
light beams?
Yeah. Follow the dot. Yeah,
follow the dot. Those guys, and they were making that tower for Micronic, now MyData then, and they were also selling it to a Swiss company called SMTech, which was, as you know, makes small placement machines and printers and other things in Switzerland. So this guy in Connecticut called me and said he'd had a big fight with MyData and he wouldn't buy anything from MyData anymore. And he said, Bob, I need 5 more towers. I want you to find me 5 more towers. So I called the president of SMTech, who I knew pretty well, and said, can you sell me 5 of your towers? And he goes, yeah. So we worked out a price, and I sent him a purchase order. And 3 weeks later, he called me and he said, Bob, I'm sorry, but I won't be able to deliver those towers. I said, why not? And he said, I didn't realize that MyData has a contract with Raytel that they're allowed to sell to me because I predate their business, but I'm not allowed to sell them to any third-party competitor, and they won't ship them to me. And I said, oh, go. So here I had an order from this customer for towers, and I had no towers. So I called Jörg Schupbach.
But knowing you, that's not going to stop you, right? You're going to find a way, right?
I called Schupbach, who was the president of Juki Automation Systems in Switzerland. And I said, weren't you telling me you saw a company that was making towers at a trade show? Didn't you mention that to me a few months ago? And he says, oh, yeah, Italian guys. And I said, I need to get an appointment with them. And so he called me back and said, the guy will meet us in Lugano next Thursday. So I flew over to Switzerland, and Schupbach and I took the train down to Lugano, which is right on the Italian border. And Matteo Paduan, who was the president of Aseji, drove up in his car, and we met in the cafe of the casino in Lugano. And 3 hours later, we shook hands on a distribution deal for the United States and Switzerland and Germany for the storage towers. And I went back, and then I just had to convince the customer in Connecticut I had a better tower for him, and I had the ability to hook up and communicate with the MyData towers and machines, so it would be like one homogeneous deal. And that's how we got started in business with Aseji. Maybe the best, I should thank the guy in Connecticut profusely, because maybe the best business decision I will have made yet. Last year, the storage towers were the only product that Juki sold more of than they did in 2019, in the middle of pandemic year. The business grew substantially. This year, it's exploding. And we've started to manufacture the products now in Japan, in addition to in Italy. The Italian factory is expanding like crazy. And our problem right now, to be honest, is to keep up with demand.
Well, that's a good problem to have. During your tours of duty, your various tours of duty, RGB, Ziva, Zivatech, Juki, the latest, your Italian friends, has there ever been a time when you thought, this is it, we're not going to make it? Have you ever been on the edge or close to the edge and faced the prospect of a failure?
Only at the very beginning. Bobby Guerin did not take a salary. His wife was principal of the school. I took $500 a month when I started in 1975 with RGB, and that wasn't a lot of money even back then. There were months I had to wait a week to take the $500 because we didn't have enough money in the checking account to pay me going on. And there were several times during those first 2 years when it was just him and me. He would go out and sell. I would do the paperwork during the day. And then at night, we would do something like stuff tool cases or prepare shipments or whatever. We worked probably average 14, 15-hour days in those times. But I was young, so I could stand it better. So yes, in those times, there was a lot of doubt whether we'd make it. But fortunately, Ziva came along with the drag soldering machine, and somebody invented multi-layer boards. And never again after that have I been in a position financially where I had to worry about the company's survival.
So that's very good, and that's very uncommon. Usually, most companies go through ebbs and flows throughout the entire lifespan of the company, where they get close to the edge many times. But you're very fortunate to have that in the early days. What, you ever seen those memes where there's a picture of, this is what I do for a living, this is what my friends think I do, this is what my parents think I do, this is what society thinks I do. What do you think are some of the misconceptions about being an entrepreneur, being self-employed, working for yourself versus the reality of working for yourself?
I don't think people, I think people concentrate on the money and the success, and they don't concentrate on what it takes to get there. It takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of mental fortitude, as you know, in starting a company, to run a company. When you run a company, you have many responsibilities, but the primary one is to the people that work for you. You've got to see that they're paid every week. You've got to see that their health insurance coverage is proper. You've got to see that their working conditions are decent. I always viewed any failure in that area as a personal failure, because as the head of the company, it was my responsibility to see that people are taken care of properly and that people are paid properly and so forth. And that puts a strain on you, especially during difficult times or recessions or so forth. I was very fortunate to not have to lay people off. We had a very bad recession in the early 2000s, I'm sure you remember. Japan ordered me to cut 15% of payroll. And they wanted the list of people I was cutting by that Friday. I held a meeting of the company. In those days, conference call to the California office. I was in the North Carolina office. And I told the people, things are bad. We've got to cut, but rather than lay people off, I'm cutting all your salaries 10%. I'm cutting my salary 35%. The management will take a 25% cut. And we'll all work here together, and when things get better, we'll restore the cuts. But that's the way we'll do it. And I didn't get a single objection.
Right. When the choice is nothing or 85% of your salary, or 90% of your salary, certainly 90% sounds good.
The more interesting reaction to that was when I went to Japan, because I'd sent them a message on Friday saying the payroll is being cut by this amount, but I didn't list any people or whatever else, and I didn't tell them what I'd done. And when I got there, you had to make a presentation for your company in front of the management group. So I made a presentation, and at the end, the first question from the CFO of the corporation was, how many people did you cut? I said, I didn't cut anybody. I said, I told them their salaries were reduced 10%. I took a 35% reduction. My top managers took a 25% reduction. And we kept all the people because we're going to need them when this recession is over. And the president of the corporation at that time, Nakamura, was an ex-banker from one of the biggest banks in Tokyo. Started really lecturing people in Japanese. And I didn't have my translation bud in because I was up making the presentation. So when I got back, I asked the translator, I said, what did he say? And he said, why didn't any of you people think of that? Why does it take an American to show us how to do it properly? Why didn't we ask people to take a cut instead of laying people off and having to hire new people later? And he was actually mad that nobody else had done this. But of course, he hadn't thought of the idea either. So it ended up being a plus on the Japan side rather than a minus.
Yeah, well, the one thing they learned from you. What advice would you give? Well, before we go there, I think I want to ask you this question. I kind of know the answer if I'm right. Tell me, at the height of your travel, you are the ultimate road warrior for a lot of years. I mean, I always thought I traveled a lot, and you put me to shame.
Not in the last year, I'm afraid.
Well, yeah, the last year we're all homebodies. Yeah, I get that. But during the heyday of your travel, tell my audience, how many days a year were you on the road?
I was 23 to 24 days a month on the road.
Yeah. So home weekends, basically. Yeah, maybe not even full weekends.
No, home maybe 2 weekends a month.
Wow. And that went on for how long? How many years on average?
On average, probably 25 years.
Yeah. A lot of people think, you're an entrepreneur, I'm an entrepreneur. We tend to know other entrepreneurs because we all like to hang out and compare horror stories together. And most of our friends are tired of hearing our stories, but we like to talk to each other. It's interesting how many people think. I asked you, what's the reality versus the perception of owning your own business? Most people think that it's writing your own paycheck and taking time off and pushing buttons and telling people what to do. And I think what a lot of people don't realize is how much work there is, whether it's mental, physical, combination, travel. That's a huge commitment. And I don't think your company would have been successful at all were it not for Bob Black on the road 27 days a month and putting your stamp on the country on behalf of Juki, on behalf of Zivatech, on behalf of Ziva, on behalf of RGB. I think that that is your major contribution to the success of your companies, is the fact that you were willing to get out there and kiss the baby, shake the hands, shake the trees, motivate the reps, make deals, negotiate, all the things that a business owner might farm out, might delegate. You were the person on the road. You were Juki. You were Ziva. And it didn't really matter where they were made or even what country they were made or who made them or what country was behind it. My interpretation was that if I was going to buy a Juki machine, I was going to call Bob Black, even though you had lots of employees.
Yeah. And I was maybe the face of the company in a lot of cases, but we had an excellent team of people, and we had an excellent group of reps, and we kept our reps over long periods of time. And the reason was that, RGB, one of my jobs was we were a rep, right? We were a rep for Ziva. We were a rep for several other equipment companies. So I had experienced the treatment that sometimes reps get. And so the reps with Juki always knew they would be paid on time. They would be paid the proper amount according to their contract. Now, of course, I never met a rep who didn't want to negotiate more in the contract.
Of course.
Right? But with us, they never had to worry about getting their money or being treated unfairly or being cheated out of money or whatever else. And also, we were famed for having the best sales meetings in the industry. And the way to have the best sales meeting in the industry is to feed the people excellently, right? Let them drink, well, not as much as they want, but copious amounts, and have succinct, valuable presentations that actually educated them on how to sell things and helped them make more money. And so, we had reps approaching us all the time that wanted to join the business, but we changed very few reps because we were usually able to get the top rep in each territory, and we're usually able to keep them.
At this very moment, as we wrap up, we're starting to run out of time, but at this very moment, someone in my audience is considering starting a company. Maybe the pandemic tossed them out of a job. Maybe they haven't, maybe their company's not around anymore, whatever. Maybe there's a young person just graduated college who has an idea that's going to be the next big thing in that person's mind. What advice would you give to a budding entrepreneur, whether they're older, wiser, whether they're younger and more naive, based on your experience? What are the, maybe one, top 2, 3 takeaways? Top
thing. Make sure what you want to do has a chance to be successful. Investigate the market. Make sure people see it the same way you do. I've met so many people that are absolutely convinced that what they've got is the greatest thing in the world, but when they go and try to share it with the people they want to sell it to, they don't necessarily share the same opinion. So before you put all the effort in, make sure there's a market there. Do some test marketing, go out, talk to people in the industry, and when you get enthusiastic reactions, you'll know you're on the right track. Second, don't kid yourself. My partner and boss for years, Rudy Warner, who I should have said earlier, I couldn't have asked for a better mentor or a better person in the industry. That Rudy Warner is not only smart, he's one of the most honest men I ever knew. You could trust him with your last dollar and never worry a minute about it. And I was blessed, frankly, to have a guy like that to work with. But before you put all your hard-earned money and work into it, don't have any illusions, right? Rudy used to say, if you go to a startup and there's all Mercedes and BMWs in the parking lot, turn around and go away because they're going out of business. He says you got to earn your way along, and you can have all those nice things after you can pay for them without stress or without a big loan to finance. So, be prepared to work hard. There's no substitute for hard work, your personal hard work and engagement to getting in. If you're going into business to have your own business, think you're going on vacation all the time. Listen, it's not like that. Taking vacations is important to get away from the stress and so forth. But work is at the beginning is more important. And so those are the 3 things I'd advise somebody who wants to start a company today.
Excellent. Well, that is very good advice. Probably advice I wish I'd heard. I think I was also Pollyannish. I like to call myself the reluctant entrepreneur. I didn't grow up thinking I want to work for myself. It's just like you, things came along, right? It's providence, it's happenstance, it's fate, it's God, it's whatever we want to put on it. We find ourselves in a situation where we end up working for ourselves, and you learn the hard way. I think I said this on another episode, but I think one of the greatest attributes of particularly a young entrepreneur is naivety. We don't know what we don't know. We don't know this can't be done. We don't know that it's going to take way more money than we'll ever have the ability to save ourselves. And the fact that we don't know that, allows us to try it. And I think if we knew, and I've said this on the show before, U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics says 75% of all new business startups are completely gone within 10 years. Half of them are gone within 5 years. Those are terrible odds. And I think, thank God I didn't know those odds, because I may not have tried it. I was talking to someone yesterday and I said, if you realized the water was cold and deep, would you have jumped? And he said, no, I thought it was warm and shallow, but once you jump, you're committed, and then you either drown or you swim. And it's probably a suitable metaphor for business. It's, maybe it's best we don't know everything. Let the universe, let history, let the business gods up there educate us when the time is right. And
yeah, and I'd say if you wanted to take business down to one sentence, business is the evaluation and management of risk.
Yes, and I'm so happy you said that, because I used to speak to colleges about entrepreneurship, and I have the I forget all 10 now, but the 10 attributes of a young entrepreneur, and one of them is passion and ego and naivety and a little arrogance and a lousy assessment of risk. That seems to be the hallmarks, not necessarily beneficial, but the hallmarks of new entrepreneurs. And maybe that's good. Like we said before, maybe not understanding the full potential of the risk is what allowed us to make those silly decisions to start against all odds. But certainly we have to acquire those skills. We have to change out the ego, the arrogance, the naivety, the poor assessment of risk, and we need to substitute those for more suitable skills to actually grow and sustain a company. And that's where I think a lot of businesses fail. People come into business with those cowboy-esque, attributes of I can never fail. I'm smarter than the rest of the world. My idea is better than any other idea out there, and they don't shift those ideas and those attributes to something more suitable to grow a business and keep it in business. And that's where I think most businesses fail. You clearly have had the ability from day one to shift your skills from gas station attendant and restaurant worker to an entrepreneur, a very successful entrepreneur and distributor of equipment throughout the electronic assembly space.
And I add one more thing. I mean, everybody has his own opinion, but also I've been greatly blessed. God's given me a lot of opportunities, and He's put me in position to take advantage of them. And I don't forget that for a minute. If I thought it was all me, I'd get too puffed up.
Well, I was going to ask you, but the question I always end with is in percentage terms, percent over percent, how much of your success do you attribute to Bob Black? How much do you attribute to luck? And in this case, let's substitute luck with
for the divine providence.
Divine providence, whatever works. How much of it, in a percentage term, how much of it is you? How much of it is something else?
I'd say 50-50. I put in a lot of hard work, but I was given a lot of opportunities. And also I met a lot of people along the way, Rudy Warner being the first of them. But, my first partner, Bob Begarin, I learned a lot from him, especially on the law of supply and demand. I was a naive guy, and he came up from the streets selling out on the road, and so he abused me of a lot of those fantasies I had about business real quick, and also my colleagues in Japan. I've met a lot of good people over there, and I would say it's changing, unfortunately, in Japan too. But long past time you couldn't do it here. You could still do business in Japan on a handshake. And a guy would cut his hand off before he'd break his word. And, that was impressive to see a lot of that as well. So I've had a lot of help along the way. I have to remember that.
Well, thank you, Bob, for being my guest. Thank you for helping me along the way, just watching what you've done, watching the commitment you've made to our industry, 27 days a month traveling. I remember hearing that and instantly putting my travel commitment into perspective. I thought I was really taking one for the team, and I'm like, no, not even close. So, you've certainly made an impact on me watching your success and your amount of confidence, watching people's heads turn towards you when you're speaking because they're interested in what you have to say it's an attribute, it's a skill. I'm not sure if it's learnable, but certainly you do possess that. And I've always enjoyed sitting back and listening. And I'm normally a talker, and I have certainly enjoyed the art of listening to your stories, and most of them I believe.
My one weakness, I need to listen more. Still.
Well, I'm told that all the time, but you got me to listen. So. Yeah. Well, Bob, thank you so much for being my guest. Continued success, particularly with your new project, and I'll look forward to hearing what's going on in your world again.
Take care.
Well, that's a wrap. Thanks for joining me on this episode of the Concept to Creation podcast, and a special thanks to my guest, Bob Black. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe on your favorite podcast app. The Concept to Creation podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and many, many others. A video version of this podcast is available on the Concept to Creation YouTube channel. If you're watching this on YouTube, be sure to subscribe and click on the bell icon to be notified when new episodes are available. We release new episodes on the first and third Tuesday of each month. Thanks for your feedback. Please keep it coming. Email me at mike@mikeconrad.com. That's Conrad with a K. Thanks again for listening or watching. Stay safe, stay healthy, and of course, stay happy. And I'll see you again very soon.
And I was meant to be free, meant to be free.